So with the first 8 episodes of Ahsoka being out, we'll do it live. I said screw it! We'll do it live! Oh, hey, so now that all 8 episodes are out for the show Ahsoka, was it the perfect, brilliant series that was just what Star Wars needed and it saved the entire franchise? Or was it, you know, a terrible, rotten show that drove the final nail in its coffin? Well, my answer to that is no. Well, you might say that wasn't a yes or no question. I know, but guess what? You don't have to only absolutely love something or absolutely hate something within Star Wars. I know that's a novel idea. I know that the Jedi Order says, no, you gotta choose the light side. The Sith say, no, we need to choose the dark side. Well, I guess you can just call me the Bendu because I'm the one in the middle. Hey everyone, I'm the guy with no name. Thanks for stopping by my channel. If you don't know who I am, I love to talk about movies, TV shows, video games, basically anything that I find interesting that I think you'll find interesting too. But thanks for coming by, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. It lets me kind of know what's working and what's not. But without further ado, let's get into talking about Ahsoka in full spoiler detail. So first off, what a really dumb plan by the New Republic captain to just let this mysterious cruiser claiming to contain Jedi on board their ship. I did appreciate though that it seemed to be kind of a callback to Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan's introduction in The Phantom Menace, and also it definitely made the scene possible that was a really cool introduction to Baylan Skoll and Shin Hati, and showed just how formidable of opponents they were. Now, I don't have a lot to say about the adventure that Ahsoka's on when we are reintroduced to the character, but I will say, when the droids self-destruct, was it just me, or was that blast radius just insane, almost like to an unbelievable point? Just a little nitpick, but I was like, dang, like those are like mini nukes that they had inside of them or something. But I will say too, when we do visit Lothal and see what Sabine's up to, what the planet's up to, I gotta admit I did geek out. If you didn't know, Lothal is a major location in Star Wars Rebels and is Ezra Bridger's homeworld. So it was awesome seeing it in live action. Also, speaking of live action, it was great seeing Clancy Brown reprise his role as Governor Ryder Azadi. You know, he did the voice of that character in Rebels, but it was awesome seeing the same person play that character in live action. And also, just a little nod to the fans, seeing the character of Jai Kell was great as well, and seeing what he's been up to. So it turns out that the artifact that Ahsoka found was a part of a star map. And I did appreciate how the design seemed to be, and really just how it worked, seemed to be very inspired by the video game The Knights of the Old Republic, which, if you haven't played that game, it's amazing. I will say it takes a bit to get into, and I might do a video on that at some point, just because it's one of my favorite video games of all time. But hey, any nod to that game I appreciate tremendously. But so long story short, Sabine and Shin Hati get in a lightsaber duel, which was pretty cool. I mean, I think they did a good job of explaining basically that Sabine was very rusty and she was outmatched. But once again, I don't know what this is with, and I'm gonna say Disney Star Wars, that these characters keep getting stabbed in the abdomen with a lightsaber and somehow survive, and it just keeps piling up, you know? First it was Kylo Ren, then it was Reva twice, and now Sabine, and I don't understand it. It's like, if you've seen any of my other videos, you've already heard me say this before, but it's like they are just determined to make Qui-Gon a wuss. So either they hate the character, or maybe they want to bring Liam Neeson down a peg or two. While on the subject of Sabine and her proficiency in different Jedi techniques, I really think that anyone who's seen Rebels is gonna be shocked, kind of like I was, that they just basically assumed that we know that Sabine is Force sensitive. Like they really should have eased in the audience that either, I don't know, I guess there should have either shown a flashback of her displaying, you know, Force sensitivity that Ahsoka picked up on, and that's what caused her to train her in the first place, or They should have talked about it. They should have at some point just mentioned that. Instead, all we get are, oh yeah, no, she's definitely Force sensitive. She just isn't good at it. And that's not how it was in Rebels. I know people point to this one kind of obscure line that Kanan says, but funny enough, the episode where that line is from is when Kanan is teaching her how to use the Darksaber, which is basically like a lightsaber, and that would have been the time for somebody to pick up on that she was Force sensitive, or maybe during that fight, if you've seen it, she gets very emotional and maybe something Force related would have happened. But it seems like an afterthought. It seems like, no, Sabine was not supposed to be Force sensitive through the 4 seasons of the show, and then later on at some point Dave Filoni was like, you know what, I think I'd like to make her Force sensitive. And it's like, that's great, you can make that decision, but just try to ease us into it a little bit better. So once Ahsoka and Sabine are able to find where Elsbeth is located, they see that she is in a giant hyperspace ring, basically is what it looks like. And I love the design of the thing, by the way, because it definitely fits in with what we know about Star Wars technology. You know, we first saw hyperspace rings in Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and there are a good amount of modifications to it, and obviously it's much larger, but you can still tell that's what it is. And also, the name is the Eye of Sion, and I appreciated that because I assume it has to be a reference to the character Darth Sion, who is actually one of the antagonists in the Knights of the Old Republic 2. Even though both of those games are not considered canon, the characters are still canon, I guess, and some of the characters in the game. So that's cool. Also, they get there, there's a space battle that ensues, and normally I'm a big space battle fan. I just found this one to be a bit drawn out. For one, I don't understand why the ship had to more or less break down in the middle of space, and then Ahsoka got on her spacesuit and fought outside of the ship. But it only turned out to be she was basically outside for, it seemed like 30 seconds, and then they got it back up and running and moved it. And just felt like those things didn't need to happen, and it wasn't as exciting as I think they thought it was. So if you never had food poisoning before, I definitely wouldn't recommend it, honestly. No, really, I got food poisoning. I was filming this video Tuesday night, and at the end of the last take, I was just like, man, I can't do anything more. I'm feeling like lightheaded and stuff. And then it started to get worse and worse, and it fully debilitated me on all day Wednesday, and now it's Thursday evening and I'm wrapping this up. So if you're wondering why the wardrobe changed, that's because this is now 2 days later. So fun stuff. Anyways, so I wanted to comment on something else as well. So we're introduced to the former Inquisitor Marok or Merrick, I forget how to pronounce it, but everyone since day one of seeing the character, because he has a mask on, was like, oh, who is that? Is it gonna be some big reveal? I saw people saying, is it Barriss Offee? Which actually I would have been okay with. I mean, I kind of want to know what happened to her. I don't think she was, some of them are saying maybe she was executed by the Republic, but I don't buy that necessarily. So I'm kind of wondering after Order 66, what happened? It makes sense she'd become an Inquisitor, but other people were saying it's maybe like the apprentice from The Force Unleashed, but Ahsoka fights him, kills him, and he turns into vapor and just disintegrates basically. So weird stuff. I kind of want to know, are we ever going to get an explanation to what happened? Was the explanation supposed to be, oh, the witches of Dathomir later on resurrect some corpses, so maybe he was one of those that was resurrected, and that was why it was kind of greenish smoke that came out. I just kind of hope that, either it's that or we get some type of explanation, because I'm not necessarily like everyone under a mask has to be somebody we already know. I'm okay with it not being the case, but I feel like they do need to explain it. With the defeat of Marok, I guess that's the pronunciation I'm going with, Ahsoka catches up to Baylan and to where the star map is currently being read. And this leads us into a pretty interesting conversation. Basically, any conversation Baylan has, especially whatever he has to say, I just found myself to be super enthralled by, and I think they did a great job really delving deep into his motivations. And if you've seen the whole show, you'll know that we don't even know I feel like we don't even know probably the half of his motivation. I mean, maybe we know his motivation, we don't know his plan, but it's a bit of both. I'm still kind of unsure of things. He hints at things, but I love that they kept it mysterious, and I just want to know as much as they can possibly tell us. But yeah, anyways, really interesting conversation between him and Ahsoka, which leads into probably my favorite lightsaber fight in the whole series. And I really just love how their different fighting styles mesh. You know, Baylan has the more traditional Jedi Knight fighting style, whereas Ahsoka has the more samurai-inspired style that we know her to have, and it's a really cool fight. I know some people loved the Anakin and Ahsoka fight, and that one's probably my second favorite lightsaber battle in the series. And then, you know, there were certain people that were raving about Ahsoka and Elsbeth at the end there, and I did like it. I looking at the discourse online, it was one of those things where it seemed like people either really loved it and were calling it the best lightsaber fight in all of Star Wars, or the worst lightsaber fight in all of Star Wars. And I just thought both of those really weren't true. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. I think both of those are exaggerated. I did like it overall. There are some flaws, but it was a cool fight. I mean, I don't understand the amount of hate it got, but that's probably my third favorite fight. So Baylan and Ahsoka, my first favorite, and the ending was pretty bold, I thought. Like, it was a bold storytelling choice to have Ahsoka get decisively beaten and supposedly dead. Of course, we didn't think that was the case. And then for Sabine to then turn around and willingly give them the star map and to be captured. I thought that was a pretty interesting choice. I mean, good on them for not having to make the good guys win all the time. This leads us into episode 5, which has to be my favorite episode of the entire series, most likely. I know it's gotten a lot of flack, at least online, and a lot of people are accusing it of being nostalgic simply for nostalgia's sake. But, I mean, Dave Filoni, while he has taken part in lots of fan service, I really can't think of many instances where he's done things that make absolutely no sense or are completely meaningless just to appease the fans and just to go, oh, this is what the fans would love to see. I mean, of course, Star Wars fans should want to see Hayden Christensen with live-action Ahsoka Tano. I mean, that's awesome, especially if you've watched the Clone Wars. But I don't think this episode is simply just a throwaway episode just for nostalgia. I don't believe that. I'd love to see a full episode commentary with Dave Filoni, because then he could really talk about the thought behind, you know, everything that happens in the episode. I think there are lots of things that none of us have thought of, none of us have talked about yet, but for starters, this episode was 100% necessary for anyone who has not seen the Clone Wars. I think these are people coming from people who have seen the Clone Wars. If you haven't seen it, I think these scenes are really necessary for you to enjoy the story and understand that Anakin did have a Padawan. Because I don't know if you're like me, but when the Clone Wars movie first came out and we found out that Anakin had a Padawan, I was kind of thrown off, because I'd already seen episodes 1, 2, and 3, and there were no mentions of Ahsoka Tano, no mentions of Anakin having a Padawan, just nothing. So I think we all assumed that he didn't have a Padawan. But when we found out he did, I just had a hard time believing how that fit in with the continuity. So by the end of the series, though, and especially how they did the finale of the series as a whole, I think they did a great job of explaining how the relationship was and why there was no mention of her, and also explained how she survived past the events of episode 3. So I think they did a great job of that. So I was fine. I already knew about Ahsoka, but for anyone who doesn't know, I think these scenes are very good in just explaining their relationship and how it worked, and just I think seeing Hayden Christensen with Ahsoka really just made her a valid Star Wars character in a lot of people's eyes. Then for people who did love the Clone Wars, of course it's nostalgic. I mean, going into Ahsoka, I was like, I really hope we get a flashback with Hayden Christensen, because why not? And so yes, it was nostalgic, and I loved the nostalgic factor of it. But at the end of the day, there are lots of different reasons behind what happens and different takeaways that Ahsoka had, but overall, I think this was some much needed reconciliation on Ahsoka's part. She needed to reconcile the master that she used to have, that she wouldn't even admit was a good master, even though he was a great master, and she later admits it. But she wouldn't admit it because then thinking about Darth Vader and how he was willing to kill her when they met and just how evil she knew he was. I think she just had she couldn't really reconcile the two. And by the end of the episode, she could, and she could realize that, you know, yes, my master was great. And yes, he did turn into Darth Vader and he turned evil, but she also knows what happened to him after, by the way. You know, she's met Luke, so of course she should know that. But just able to look at all the different aspects of Anakin and accept them all at the end of the day was really, I think, the overall point of the episode. So definitely not a throwaway episode. Oh, one last thing before we get into the final 2 episodes and more or less the conclusion of the show. I loved seeing the character of Jason Syndulla appear as well. I was kind of curious if we would get that, given how Rebels ended. It seemed like a must, but we hadn't really heard much of the character in Star Wars canon. So it was great seeing him and seeing how he has Force abilities like his father, and I look forward to seeing more of what happens. I know some people are theorizing that Ezra will train him, and I think that would be awesome. I think that's a great path to go. He can be trained by Luke Skywalker, although let's hope he doesn't stick around too long as his Padawan. We know how that can tend to end up. Once we get to Peridea, which is like the main reason of the entire show and the main point of the entire story, unfortunately it kind of goes downhill for me. I kind of found it to be just a little slow and a little more flawed, so it was a bummer, honestly. But we get there and we see the Night Sisters in live action, which that's awesome. They're great antagonists in Star Wars. If you don't know, they're in the Clone Wars, and they're also they were Legends characters, and which is before Disney basically made the Star Wars canon. They were in a lot of different stories, and so I was excited to see them in live action. I'm interested to see why they allied themselves with Thrawn. It seems like they have some type of deal, and especially the end of the last episode seems to hint at what their deal was. But, you know, it was cool. And speaking of Thrawn, Lars Mikkelsen plays him amazingly. He does a great voice for Thrawn in Rebels, so seeing him play him in live action was a treat as well. And yes, I know people have some gripes about his certain aspects of his appearance, let's just say, but give the guy a break. He's older. That happens to people when they get older, and if you've seen Peridea, there's not a lot of stuff to do around there, so I'm sure just, you know, more or less just thought about a lot of stuff and spent a good amount of time in the mess hall. Give the guy some slack. No, really though. I was happy to see Lars Mikkelsen. Unfortunately, he's not as smart as he should have been though. Like I was really bummed by that Thrawn is supposed to be this really brilliant strategist, and the story should have been Ahsoka, Sabine, and Ezra getting pretty much like all their actions getting successfully countered by Thrawn, and eventually they probably should have had to have some kind of conversation like, guys, he knows our every move, we gotta think about something that he wouldn't possibly think about. It should have been like that, but instead he tries to counter all their stuff, and sure, he slows them down, and at the end of the day his main goal is to get off planet, but you can't tell me that his main goal and plan wouldn't be made better if he went ahead and killed the 3 of them too, because there could be some serious problems and thorns in his side going forward. So I think Thrawn should have tried to kill them a little bit more. It's not some genius thing to be like, ha ha ha, I'm gone. It's like, no, like they're gonna try to stop you, and you should kill them. It's in your best interest. So I don't know, but especially, okay, gotta say, so when they're on those warg type things, and you see Thrawn's Star Destroyer suddenly appear, and he starts having them rain down fire on them, I thought, wow, that was a cool moment. That's smart on Thrawn's part. But then they just dodge them, you know, and then they make it there anyways. And I was like, I just think you would think that a turbo laser blast from a Star Destroyer would be so thick. It would be like, I don't know if you played Call of Duty, but in those levels where you're firing at bad guys from the drones, it should be like, you know, one blast from a turbo laser should be destroying the terrain and stuff, or like big enough that it would be almost impossible not to hit them, at least not with one of them. So I thought that should have been something that, oh my gosh, let's turn around, we're about to get pulverized, and let's figure out another way to get inside. But no, they just plow right through it and get there completely unscathed. Oh, and I can't forget that Amon Esfandi as Ezra he did a great job. It was really great seeing Ezra in live action and seeing someone who could portray the character convincingly. Like I keep talking about, there were certain characters that maybe was a little jarring seeing in live action, but sure, Ezra's appearance changed because he's older now and he has, full-on beard and stuff like that, but he really showed us the essence of Ezra, and I just wish we got to see more of him. Also, when they're fighting, it's kind of weird, the first time we see them fight, that he rejected his own lightsaber from Sabine and said the Force was his ally, only then to later use a blaster, and then in the next episode he makes his own lightsaber, and it's like, okay, I mean, maybe they should have done a better job of explaining that, because it seems pretty, like you said, the Force is his ally, but then all of a sudden he realized, yeah, never mind, and that was just kind of dumb, so didn't really make sense. Also, when the three of them do attack Thrawn's fortress and get there despite Thrawn's best efforts, and then they fight the stormtroopers and stuff like that, seeing the zombie troopers, that was cool. I love that, and I've seen some people saying that, what, zombies in Star Wars? I'm like, no, there's precedence. There's definitely precedence for zombies in Star Wars. In the Clone Wars Season 2, there were these Geonosian zombie type creatures, and then also in Season 4, which is even more relevant to this, the Night Sisters resurrect their dead ancestors to become like a zombie army to help them fight the CIS. So there's definitely precedence, and especially with Night Sisters raising people from the dead. So I didn't mind that. I thought that was a cool idea. Unfortunately, the execution didn't seem to be very good. It seemed like a lot of the same stuff, like deflect blaster fire, kill some stormtroopers, run away, deflect blaster fire, kill stormtroopers, run away, and it felt like, slash the door and shut it, and then, oh, they're through, fight them, and it just seemed like it went on for a long time with not much variety. Also, this is nitpicky, but I mean, I even went back just to make sure. I'm like, I'm not being too hard on them, and it's nitpicky, but I think it's valid that the way they deflected the blaster fire just seemed very weird to me. Like, it seemed very rigid, like, and I'll actually show it instead of, don't let me demonstrate it. I'd rather show you it. That'll do a much better job of showing what I'm trying to say. But in the prequels, I thought the deflecting blaster fire was done really well and looked like they were definitely in control of what they were doing. Whereas you look at Ahsoka and Sabine and Ezra, although Sabine didn't mostly deflect stuff with her armor. But it just looked very weird. So like I alluded to earlier, I did enjoy the Ahsoka versus Elsbeth fight overall. There were some flaws, like for instance, I don't think it was as big of a payoff as they were hoping for it to be, just because we really hadn't seen these characters interact at all since the Mandalorian Season 2. So it's just been so much time that it wasn't really like, oh my gosh, I've been waiting for this rematch. Also, I know that the prequels sometimes maybe look a little too choreographed, but some of the choreography, I should say, was shaky at times. It wasn't as good as I was hoping. I really think they need to move more towards the prequels and less away from them, because there's way more good than bad for sure. I understand it takes time to do stuff like that, so I get it, but also they might benefit from using a stunt double more often for Ahsoka Tano. I mean, I don't know for sure how much they use the stunt double, if at all. I know Rosario Dawson does a lot of it, and she does it better than I could, but sometimes it's noticeable to me that, hey, we could use someone with a little bit more, physicality, just to be frank. But she does great overall, like I said. One thing I did notice, and I think this is maybe half my problem with all of these hand-to-hand fights that we've had throughout all the shows, just about all the Disney Plus Star Wars shows, is the way the cinematography could be a lot better. I mean, you go back to the lightsaber fights in any of the movies, especially the prequels, and the cinematography is dynamic. I mean, there's so many different shots. It's beautifully shot, and I think especially the Ahsoka and Elsbeth fight is just very bland. It's just like one shot here, and they're fighting, you know, Ahsoka on one side, her on the other. Okay, another shot, and it's the same types of shots mostly. I mean, there's a few like overhead ones, but it's like they gotta do a better job of shooting these things going forward, because you got the prequels to look at, and those are not just one continuous shot for a long time, then another shot that's very similar. It's like so I hope they can do better. I hope they can see what they did right and what they did wrong. Going to Hera's storyline again, I haven't spent much time there. I did enjoy seeing Chopper in live action. I enjoyed Genevieve O'Reilly back as Mon Mothma. I also thought it was great seeing Anthony Daniels in a cameo as C-3PO. That was another thing people complained about. I don't understand why. It's like anytime a character we know appears in any Star Wars project, it gets immediately bombarded with, you know, oh, nostalgia, fan service, etc. And it makes perfect sense why C-3PO would be there. They're in the New Republic Senate. I mean, I think it would have made sense for even Leia to come in before C-3PO, but I get it's hard because Carrie Fisher's passed away, and do they recast, or do they do what they did with Leia in Rogue One? I feel like they've already made their bed by doing Leia and Luke, that no, they shouldn't recast, they should keep doing the, you know, the CGI faces and stuff like that. But sorry, I don't know all the inner workings of how they do that. But if they weren't going to do Leia, then C-3PO is the next best choice. So I thought that was a ridiculous criticism, and it was great seeing him. The politics, I love politics in Star Wars when it's done right. But unfortunately, I didn't really think it was done right here. It was just a little too dumbed down, a little too. There's a lot of things that make sense, and like, why would the New Republic be so against Hera looking into Thrawn, of all people, coming back? Like, it's not hard to put together that Thrawn coming back would be catastrophic to the New Republic. They know who he is, so it's just stupid. It's just there should be a little more. At least give a little more sense to why you don't want her looking. Because if you're saying there's no threats for us in the entire galaxy, we're not at war, etc., then okay, why are you acting like we're being just so vulnerable by letting me and my group go look over here? Like, if we're not at war, then and there's no threats around us, what's the downside of me looking? So finally, let's talk about where the show Ahsoka leaves off all the characters. So Ezra gets back home, and I'm very glad that he does. I don't know if it's just me being nervous, but I felt like there were certain lines in the show that were foreshadowing that he wasn't going to make it, and I was just preparing myself that, dang, like, probably the major character of Rebels who sacrificed himself at the end of season 4, and we've been waiting to finally get to him, and we don't even get 2 episodes with him and he's gonna die. I was just preparing myself that might happen. But I'm really glad that didn't happen, and we get to see more from him. And him reuniting with Hera and Chopper was a very nice moment, very heartfelt. It was interesting seeing that the show ends with Ahsoka and Sabine being stranded on Peridia. I didn't expect that. I'm kind of curious how they're going to get off it, because of course they are. But a lot of people were complaining that the Purrgil, the whales, were a big plot point that didn't make sense. That, oh, if Thrawn's so smart, how come he didn't follow the space whales out? How come he didn't figure that out? It just goes to show not everyone paid attention as closely as they should have. just being perfectly honest. They explained that the whales flew to Peridia to die. That was their final trip. So there was no going back. That's why there was a huge, ring, if I remember correctly, of whale skeletons that they go there to die. So you can't really track where they came from, so I don't think the whales are going to be the key out, unless if maybe Ahsoka is able to bond with them through the Force in some way and figure something out. I don't know, but I think they are stranded, and I'm curious how they're going to get out of that. As far as Shin Hati goes, if I were one of the members of the Raiders, I would take her holding her ignited lightsaber above her head as a sign of hostility and aggression. And I'd probably be nervous that she was going to go all Anakin on the Tusken Raider camp on us. So hopefully that's not the case, and because I think people are right in saying that she's basically saying, hey, follow me, I'll be your leader. But if they, I mean, her holding an ignited lightsaber, that could easily go another way of like, oh my gosh, she's about to attack us, let's attack her first. So hopefully they understand that. And finally, Baylan's skull goes to a place that I'm guessing is still on Peridia. I mean, it has to be, right? And there are two huge statues, and one is of the father and one is of the son in the Mortis arc, from the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars, and that's a big deal. It's in Rebels, it basically confirmed that the Mortis gods, as they call them, because they're basically force wielders that are so powerful, they're almost gods, and they pretty much, there's a lot that we still don't know about them, but they pretty much hold the whole force in balance for the galaxy. Obviously, what happened with them in the Clone Wars leaves that up in the air, kind of how, I don't know, how the balance is maintained, I guess is the best way to put it. But I think he's more there for the world between worlds, and I'm thinking there is a fan theory going around that Baylan wants to use the world between worlds to kill a person or some people who he thinks are an issue, who caused this, you know, chaos in the galaxy. So I'm very curious how that's going to play out, but I'm very sorry about Ray Stevenson yet again. I've said this before, but obviously he's a person. Star Wars is insignificant when it comes to real life, and I'm very sorry that just because of him as a person and for his family. But in regards to Star Wars, I'm also very bummed because he played this role super well. I'm really glad this is one of the last things, if not the last thing, that he was in that will be able to, you know, showcase his talent, because he really is talented. He was my favorite character probably on the entire show. And if they're gonna recast, which I think they should, there's too much left up in the air for this character, but if they're gonna recast, I hope they know that it's gotta be someone great. Those are big boots to fill. So those are my spoiler-filled thoughts on Season 1 of Ahsoka. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the show and any and all spoilers that you'd love to discuss. I do reply to each and every comment, so don't be shy, I'd love to interact with you. Also, if you're looking for other stuff to watch, I do have an episode by episode, non-spoiler, just kind of my thoughts and reviews of the 8 episodes of Ahsoka. I'm also following the Marvel series Loki right now and making videos for that. And then there will be some more movie reviews coming up soon, so be on the lookout. I appreciate each and every one of you. This is Guy with No Name, signing off.